Okay, so hello everybody, and welcome to our next Be Together Life in Care podcast at Berkley Care. My name is Leah. I'm the Chief People Officer here at Berkley, part of the Clarion community. And today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by two very special guests to discuss something which is a topic very close to my heart, and that is neurodiversity. So the first of my two guests is the amazing Claire Hodges. Claire is our General Manager at Blenheim House in Melksham, and is also a member of our Neurodiversity Steerco working group. And she's a real passionate advocate of neurodiversity and inclusion. So welcome, Claire. Delighted to have you here. And my second guest is someone who probably needs no introduction if you've met him before. He is the brilliant Theo Smith. Theo is a neurodiversity advisor, a speaker, and the co-author of the book Neurodiversity at Work. If you haven't read that, there's a plug for you there, Theo. Brilliant book. And he also works for the Dynamist Group. So welcome, Theo. Great to have you both on. So before we kind of delve into this subject, and we can all, I'm sure, talk for hours about this subject, it would be great if you could just tell us a little bit more about yourselves and why neurodiversity is so important to you. Claire, let's start off with you.
Hi, Leah. Hi, Theo. Hi, everyone. So I've been a general manager for maybe 8 or 9 years now. And neurodiversity wasn't something that I really thought about. It wasn't something, it's not in my family. I didn't think that I had friends that were neurodiverse. I've always known there's a little bit something different about myself. I really struggle with concentration, with completing tasks, and and just thought that was as I was. I think in the last year working for Berkley, where neurodiversity has kind of come out into the open and come into its own, it's really allowed me to recognise areas of myself, but also the staff teams. I just find it phenomenal. I find it fascinating, and I just feel there's so much more we can do to allow and enable people with neurodiverse needs to come and work in what is a very emotional and an emotional place to work, where people with those needs are just phenomenal, and we know that because they work with us already. So yeah, that's why it means so much to me.
Brilliant. Thanks, Claire. And Theo, over to you. Tell us a little bit more about you.
Oh, thanks so much. It's really nice to be here. So yeah, I am a dad of a child who's been diagnosed with autism, ADHD, and dyslexia. And that was one of the big drivers for me on this topic. I'm a HR and talent advisor by trade. So that's kind of where I've spent the last 15 plus years. But about 5 years ago, I came onto the topic of neurodiversity, and it was reflecting upon myself while I sat in a hotel room watching ADHD and Me with Rory Bremner. And it just triggered, oh, hang on a minute. Like, that really resonates with me. And this isn't naughty boy syndrome, or this isn't how I resonate with some of my family members, and some of them needed more sustainable care, 24/7 care in certain instances. So then I found it difficult to connect to the concept of ADHD and me until I saw this program of somebody talking about it in a very different way. And that was the beginning of the journey of going on that journey of exploration with my child. And that's where I started to want to share this concept with the wider world. And so I started to work within my community, within talent and recruitment and HR. But I realized there was limited information. So I couldn't really find the positives. There was lots of negatives, lots of things around what somebody who's autistic or ADHD can't do. And they might be a great developer, or they might be a great mathematician. Well, I promise you, I'm neither of those, and I never will be. So, like, where do I fit in? Like, where does my child fit in? Where do my other family members? Where would have my mum fitted in? Because she is definitely MD, right? And where does my sister? And these are undiagnosed people, right? These people who don't come with the label, but they certainly faced the challenges, and they certainly had incredible strengths, and some of those strengths were disabled, right? They never got to fulfill the things that they should have, and they had a lot of trauma and challenges with mental health and well-being that may have put barriers in place for them to succeed in certain areas. So that has been my whole passion now, right? I would just want to enable people. I want to enable people who are facing walls that are sometimes so high they can't get over them. That's where the book came from. That's why I've got a podcast. That's why I create loads of video content. But also that's why I now advise companies on the topic of neurodiversity, and specifically in the workplace, and how they can change their work practices to open the doors to more people.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Theo. And, at Berkley, we've been working with you now for, a little over a year, haven't we? Around our neurodiversity strategy and really helping us to think about how can we support our existing team members who are neurodiverse, but also how can we attract more neurodiverse people. So if we just step back slightly, this term neurodiversity, and we hear other terms like neurodivergent, neuroinclusion. Theo, tell us, what exactly is neurodiversity in these different terms, and I guess why does it matter so much?
Yeah, of course. So neurodiversity as a concept is that all our brains are unique and incredible, right? They're all different, but not all of us have been marginalized or system impacted or faced barriers just because of the way that our brain works. And that's what's become really fascinating for people. Not that every brain is like a thumbprint, which you could kind of think, well, I kind of would have thought that. Billions of brain cells, that's quite complicated, right? So surely it's, a thumbprint less complicated than billions of brain cells, each one of us. So the diversity of human brains, the critical element of that is that some people, because of what we've built over the last probably 100 to 200 years, globalization, industrialization, the Internet of Things, AI, bright lights, busy environments, crowded rooms, increase in population, all of these things have meant that brains that existed on this planet that performed perfectly well, when we lived in tribes and we had farms and we lived in different spaces and places, and we didn't have these big bright lights and noisy environments, those brains were performing really well overnight, because that's what we're talking about in 100, 200 years of evolution. Overnight have faced these significant barriers that the brain has not had time to evolve. And just quickly to give you an example of where this exists elsewhere, we see this in the animal kingdom. So the Mexican tetrablind cavefish, right, evolved to be blind in the caves of Mexico because it got flooded, got pushed into these caves. They normally existed with light outside, but they evolved to be blind. First, they lost their eyesight. Then they lost their eyes completely because they didn't need them anymore. So they saved energy by not having eyes. Their pigmentation in their skin, they became almost translucent, because they didn't need the energy it took to create color in their skin. So this is kind of an evolutionary process, actually saying we don't need eyes as these fish, and therefore to get rid of them. We can make an assumption that not having eyes means it's less than. That's not the case. In this instance, not having eyes is more than. They are more than capable of fish with eyes in that environment because they use much less energy, because you process a huge amount of information through what you see, even when you're asleep. So more competitive because they don't have eyes. Now we're thinking about the human brain in exactly the same way. We have incredible human brains, but we've switched on the lights and they're no longer competitive. The lights are our environments. We can change the environments to enable this incredible human brains. And that for me is why I'm so passionate about neurodiversity, and why we built this stuff, right? We built this stuff that hurts us. Why can't we change it?
Absolutely brilliant. And the analogy of the fish there, Theo, and neurodiversity, absolutely fantastic. But a really great example, isn't it, of differences ultimately, and how we evolve and we adapt. Claire.
I was just listening to that, Theo, and I feel like something's just clicked, and tell me if I've kind of taken it on board wrong, but it's kind of, there's so much going on that there's too much that people's brains can't focus on things because it's being spread so thinly. Is that kind of what you were saying with regards to the fish, that there's just too much coming in? So we lose the strengths in because we're trying to spread out our brains over so many areas. We're not being allowed to kind of use the strengths that are there, because we're trying to do everything instead of do things very well.
Yeah,
So
and we're
that's
getting
kind of-
pushed.
yeah.
Yeah, and we're getting pushed into environments. We're getting pushed into work practices. It's all aspects of our life, Claire. And the problem is, it's like I define it as like eating kryptonite. Like if we had superpowers, if we were superhuman, and one day we feel great and we can do stuff, and the next day we completely can't do anything. And the reality is, we are feeding ourselves. At first, we're being fed it by others, but now we don't even notice we're feeding it to ourselves. And what I mean by that is, because people tell you, oh, you need to work in a big open plan environment. Everybody does. It's better for you. So you go along with it. And then you get migraines and you get visual aura and you get exhausted and you like being with people, but there's this other stuff happening to you that's stopping you being able to do your job. And because everybody else is telling you it's good for you, you keep doing it. And it keeps harming you. Your migraines get worse and it gets more impactful. There's a point where we need to go, actually, I like some of this, but it is disabling me from being able to do stuff. And these disabling factors can throw you off the edge of a cliff. Like it can literally be the point of despair, because nobody has given you the power to understand that it's the human brain. And if you make some adjustments, it's going to help you. Just like an athlete, if they were struggling in an area of performance, right, they would look at their nutrition. They'd look at how they're training. They'd look at the impact on the body. Exactly the same with the human brain. What are we doing that is pulling the human muscles in the brain? What are we doing? Nutrition, I realized that high protein diet is really good for me. High carb diet is not. High carb, sugars, burns me out really quickly. High protein, perform much better at concentrating. I'm not having to take a drug to achieve that. I'm just adapting and changing nutrition, exercise, environment, working in stints, having breaks, thinking about the lighting, the noise, who I meet. Like we are all in control of what we do, but we need to enable each other to be able to do it, to understand what are the triggers, what are the impacting factors that are disabling it. So that's what it is. And then it's like, okay, I don't need to see all day long. I need to switch the lights off and I need to think. I need to take some time to walk in the woods or to stimulate creativity. We just get up every morning and kind of get into this thing of doing what we've always done and what we're told to do. And eventually we burn out. And unless what we've seen clear, which is when we get together and we talk like we did, and you come down and you start to analyze it and think about it and discuss it. And you start to go, oh, yeah, I feel a bit like that. And that resonates with me. And that makes so much sense why I did that thing 5, 10, 15 years ago. Like I can now see that it was what was happening in my brain. Maybe I could have changed some of those things. Maybe we can change some of those things for others.
I think listening to you again there, Theo, I think up until about a year, 18 months ago, I was trying to perform as all the other managers within the group that I work for. And it was very, this needs to be done on this day, and you need to get, your paperwork needs to be done and your audits need to be done, and you need to perform at this level and your investigations need to look like this. And I spent so many years in a really heightened state of anxiety, feeling less than, because I couldn't do what the other people were doing. Within the last year and working within Berkley, and I have to take my hat off to everyone that's been involved in this, because for myself, I've come such a long way. I now do things my way, but get the same outcome. And I cannot tell you that by doing things my own way and having people understanding how I work, that they're actually getting the best from me, because I'm able to give my best, because I'm allowed to do it in my own way. And that's then led to me being able to then roll that out within my own team, and observing that don't work well to being given instructions that way, or they turn up late for work because their sleep pattern is very different to other people's. And it's not about getting them to conform, it's about, well, hang on a minute, let's throw conformity out the way. Let's rid ourselves. We need that person to get into work. Doesn't matter how we get them there, that's the trickery. That's the coming of speaking to people like yourselves and listening to those people. You know, we can stamp them all with the same stamp and said they're a care assistant, they need to get in, they need to do this. Well, that's great, but how? What do they need to be able to give us their absolute 110% best? And that's what I find so exciting. And, you know, because it worked for me, the anxiety has gone through the floor. You know, I am what I am, you know, and people accept that. And once we open our eyes and see what people have to offer, and just with a few tweaks, we're getting the most amazing team. So yeah.
Thanks, Claire. It's you've certainly been on a journey, haven't you? And I know, Thea, you've worked with Claire around that journey as well. And what really struck me is what this comes down to is we spend a lot of time, don't we, getting to know our residents and understanding what they want and what they need and what they like. And actually, our team members are just as important in that equation as well. We need to put our teams front and center and individuals and, you know, have these open discussions about what works for them, what doesn't, how can we help them, how can they help themselves as well. Claire, it would be really interesting to just touch on some of the things you talked about there, particularly around your team. You know, what is going on in terms of neurodiversity at Berkley and some of the work that you've been doing with your team? Chat us through that.
Okay, so it might not surprise you, it might, to know that 30% of our staff team either have a diagnosis or have some kind of neurodiverse aspects to them. And there's an even higher percentage, which is 40% of our staff team have family or loved ones that suffer or that live with neurodiverse needs. I think it kind of came to me maybe about 10 months ago, and I had a staff member who, and I noticed that Theo referred to this naughty boy, who was like a naughty boy. You know, he could never get here on time. You asked him to do anything, it was kind of, you know, it went over his head, but he was the most amazingly genuine, empathetic kind of young man I'd ever met. And I decided to spend a bit of time talking to him and find out what his struggles were. And I spent some time with this young man, and his struggles were that he would go out of a night time. He would know he needed to get back home to get to work, but then his friends and his peers would kind of get involved and it would fall by the wayside. We put some measures into place for him, which was that he set himself an alarm for the next day to remind him that he had work. And that alarm reminded him he had work the next day, kind of then reset him to kind of change his decision making for the rest of that evening. Breaking down tasks for him so he could visually see what was expected of him through the day, because if he wasn't given that kind of set kind of agenda of what was needed, it wouldn't automatically it wouldn't automatically jump into him what he needed to do. That really helped him as an individual, but it also opened the conversation with the staff team that how we are and how we interact with people with neurodiverse needs. And all it is understanding and kindness sometimes. And every one of us is different, you know, but there was always differences that people would find more unacceptable. For example, if someone was to have a physical disability, you know, whether they'd had a stroke or, you know, some kind of physical disability, people were really understanding of that and would say, you know, well, let's make changes to the environment because they've got a physical disability. No one knew that making changes to the way we converse or we assist somebody with neurodiverse needs is exactly the same. You know, you just and to treat it with kindness. And I had the most amazing conversations with staff team, just sat around the table, and literally this particular young man left the care home to go and try another career, but he ended up coming back because he just felt so comfortable within this environment. So that was from a personal level. With Berkley as a whole, I've been doing a lot of interviews last 2 weeks, and I will say 3 out of the 6 care staff that I've interviewed have neurodiverse needs. And what I'm noticing is there's so much, as soon as they mention it to me and then I open up and tell them what we're doing as a group, you can see them relax as if like they've come home. Oh my God, I'm going into a company that's really going to look after me and put the things in place I need. And that's phenomenal. And you can probably see, Leah, that I've got a big grin on my face because it's like they've just never heard of it, you know. So how amazing is that? Berkley as a company are allowing people to feel comfortable in their own skin and come into work.
It's
So
so
phenomenal.
important. Yeah, it's so important, isn't it? And I just want to pick up on something you said there, Claire, and thank you so much for sharing that insight with us. You talked about this young gentleman and some of the barriers that he came across. But you also mentioned that he was one of the most empathetic people that you had ever worked with. My goodness me, what a strength that is. Theo, just to kind of ask you around this kind of idea, I know you talk about super abilities, don't you? The perception that being neurodiverse, for example, is one which brings difficulties and barriers. Is that still quite common? Is there a shift to more focusing on actually those strengths and the super abilities, and what do they look like?
Well, what's really fascinating is the jobs of the future, the increase in the types of jobs that we're going to see, whether it's in, like data security or AI, machine learning, all of these very interesting areas, and compliance or looking at the planet sustainability. Those types of new roles that are going to be generated there are going to be very good roles for people who are autistic or ADHD, which is what we're talking about, people who face barriers or dyslexic, for a number of reasons, because they overextend in areas, if we think somebody like Greta Thunberg, for example, in kind of social justice, in doing the right thing, in seeing things in a very linear way. So, levels of empathy that are just not seen in most other people, right? That level of care and consideration and seeing it as it is. Now, sometimes that can feel like a problem because you've got somebody who's going to call stuff out, right? And they may call stuff out. They may say to you, "You look pretty rubbish today." Now, as on a human level, you don't want to be told you don't look great, right? You don't look great today. What's wrong with you? But if we bring that down to what's going on in that individual's mind at that moment, what they're doing is they're calling out what they see. Now, we need that in our environments because actually sometimes you need that level of kind of direct response to what they're seeing so that we can save people's lives, so that we can catch people before they fall, so that we can stop organizations making big mistakes that have financial implications. Like we need people like that. So what we see in people who've been marginalized and system impacted, who may have struggled in school or done very well in school, but struggle with relationships and connecting with others, is they have super abilities in narrow areas, right? So if we look at this across cognitive skills, when we assess people, whether we assess them for a job or whether we assess them more broadly for other areas or a university, we may assess them across 6, 7, 8 cognitive skills, right? And most people, they may be scoring, high or across certain areas. If you're going to be a top management consultant, you might score high across them all, right? But in reality, if you don't score fairly well across all of them, you score really high on one and low across the others, you're never getting through the door, because the way that we're assessing is based on the overall score across all cognitive areas. So this is the problem that we have at the moment. That is a reason why almost 80% of people with an autism diagnosis in the UK don't have a job today, right? Fact. Now, pre-COVID, more of them were in work, but they were in part-time work. But obviously part-time jobs went during COVID. So we've got a huge proportion of workers, potential workforce, who are not in work. They're sat at home. They've done work, but they can't get back through because they've got high cognitive abilities in a narrow area, high level of empathy as an example, or highly creative, great people skills, or brilliant mathematician, or combination, depends. But we're not letting them through because of the ways that we assess, because of the ways that we interview, because we look at them and think, oh, you're going to be a problem, rather than thinking, well, if I could just help you with these areas, you would be the most empathetic person in our team. And by the way, that's going to be really useful when we put you in front of family members, when we really need to understand what the core problems are going on within the environment, when we really need to get to the heart of the problem, right? Because sometimes you don't want to spend all your time in the heart of the problem, but sometimes you need to know what it is. You miss it, compliance problem, right? So it's these super skills that individuals have got that we, at the moment, are letting them sit at home. And if anybody's getting confused around what this looks like, this isn't just potential care staff or nurses, or this is senior executives. There's people sat at home with a PhD or two, right? I kid you not, who cannot get into work because they cannot get through the recruitment and assessment process. Irrelevant of the fact they're geniuses, academically brilliant in their narrow area, they can't get through this measure, which is across these 6 cognitive skill areas. So we've got to think about what can we change to enable that. And some organizations have recognized this. JP Morgan, Chase, IBM, Microsoft have been looking at this for about 10 years. Actually, they struggle a bit more because of their size complexity. They've shown that it works in small programs, that if you enable these people, these individuals, they go on to outperform their neurotypical counterparts, right? If you give them the right tools to be able to enable them into those narrow skill areas, right? JP Morgan identified as about 138% more productive than their counterparts. There was a great example of somebody in my village where I live who's non-verbal, right? He can't communicate verbally like many of us. He's autistic, yet through a government incentive and scheme, he got to work for a company whereby they gave him a longer onboarding process and they took him away from the normal recruitment assessment process. The team, they did an interview with him, and the team identified him as a better worker than any of them. So what they had to do is, because they had to check for health and safety, they couldn't get him to fill out the health and safety form or go online and do it. They had to visually get him to like throw a spillage on the floor and see how he responded to it to score him. So different process to assess that he's got the skills to be in the environment, so he's not a risk, right? But because they adapted the way that they assessed, he got the job. And then they created cards. Because he's not communicating verbally, he can communicate with a card like, I need this, I need to do that, I need to go for a break, I need more work. And all of his workers in what was a very typical manufacturing type environment at the beginning were like, I don't know how this guy's going to work with us. Like, can't speak, right? How's that going to work? To, we can't give this guy enough work. This guy beats us all in terms of his productivity. And his mum and dad came on when on the weekends, he's asking if he can go into work. Because for him, this is the place he loves, the routine, the structure, the coming in, being valuable, getting paid like this. Yet you could easily say, well, he can't communicate by voice. So what's the point? Rubbish. And the changes were not difficult. They were not costly, but they needed to happen up front. And once you got over the upfront bit, boof, employee for life and smashing it out of the park.
Wow, what a really inspirational story there. And I think it just goes to show, doesn't it, that it's not always big changes that need to take place, or even things that cost money, actually. Sometimes it's more about our habits and our processes and and adapting things to meet individual needs. It's really, really interesting. And Theo, just to go back to, you said 80% of people with autism don't have jobs. If you think about the care industry at the moment and the number of vacancies that we have in the industry, if we were just to attract even 1% more neurodiverse individuals to the sector, not only would we have a really beautifully diverse workforce with many different strengths and skills, we potentially could also solve our recruitment crisis.
Couple of things on that. In short, yes, this is not a UK problem. This is the same stats reflected in the US, right? And we know they probably exist across Europe, but the data is not available. This is government data. And those are only people with an autism diagnosis. We know only 1 in 3 or 4 of people with an autism diagnosis are women. We know the health sector overextends on women in terms of women within roles, which is really important. So you could enable more women into the workplace who didn't benefit from the autism diagnosis, because you don't need the label, and ADHD, who, by the way, will also face challenges when they hit perimenopause and menopause that's not recognized and understood because of the changes within the body, within the mind. Often women who didn't get the diagnosis, who don't understand some of the challenges they had in puberty, hits them in their late 30s, early 40s. And those challenges can be significant, especially if they don't know what's going on. And as an employer, you don't know what's going on. Now, I guarantee you've got those women in your workplace already, and they will be hitting that point. And if you're not even thinking about menopause, perimenopause, and the impacts of neurodiversity on that whole piece, whoa, like, what are you doing? You're walking into fire without like any protection, because you just you're gonna have employees leaving, right? And the mental health and well-being will be impacted, and you're going to lose great people, simply. But the other thing is, this is social responsibility, right? Think about this is social mobility, right? So as an organization, think around the push from the EU and from other governments, countries around social responsibility, social mobility. Like, this gets even bigger when you put it in that context. And as Claire already said, almost half your workforce is already being impacted in some way, shape, or form. So, like, shut your eyes to it if you want. Watch good employees leave. Watch productivity go down the drain. Watch mental health and well-being hit a wall, which it is broadly across the globe, for not only those reasons, many other reasons. But we can rectify some of this stuff, right? But not if we say it's too much to think about. It'll hurt you more by saying it's too much to think about. That's a reality, a fact. If you start to deal with it, some front end changes, adjustments, and considerations and human connections will make a massive impact and difference, as Claire knows.
I just want to say as well, if we're looking at how we enable these people to come into our workplace, we want to start at the beginning. We want to start with the recruitment process, which is the part of the steer group that I'm going to be sitting on. But we've actually already got the people within our employment at the moment to help us take us back to the beginning. So we're going to go full circle, because we already employ people that have neurodiverse needs, ADHD, autism, dyslexia. Why don't we utilize those people to then tell us how to make the recruitment process look? So we're not doing it blind. We're just having to equip those people to bring their ideas and their knowledge of their own conditions, of their own neurodiverse needs, and put them back at the beginning with us to then start that recruitment process to get more and more of these 80% of people that are sat at home. I will just say I'm nearing menopausal age now, so please be on the watch out for that, guys. So it's all downhill from here, I think.
Just another thing as well, I work with an organization where a manager and an employee came up to me after a talk. They own a variety of things, hotels, manor houses, but I did a talk, and the person responsible for forestry, looking after the forests within that group, and their employee came up to me afterwards and went, that really resonated. ultimately, the very short story is, and I recorded a podcast on this, but the manager recognized some challenges with the employee. They told them that they have seizures. These seizures in their employment got worse. This individual who got a first-class degree in forestry sometimes couldn't even tell him what an oak tree was, right? Because in the moment they were panicking and they couldn't recall things immediately, even though they were an expert in their field. And these seizures got worse and worse until, through speaking with his wife, who worked in teaching, she said, "Do you think she could be autistic?" And he was like, "I don't know. Isn't that a naughty boy syndrome again?" He's like, and she's like, "No." And he said, "Well, because he had a close relationship with her, because she'd come in straight from university, and he really wanted to help her, and because she couldn't drive because of these seizures, he had to pick her up and drive around quite a bit. He sat in the car and went, 'Could you be autistic?' And that led her on a journey of reflection, and answer was, 'I don't know.' Anyway, they got the autism diagnosis. They supported her to get the autism diagnosis. They then worked with her on making simple adjustments. Sometimes, like, they didn't need to worry so much if she cried. Sometimes the sensory overload meant that she became tearful, or that she needed to lie flat on the ground, or that she needed to take time out. But ultimately, she is an incredible employee. So when he made some of these adjustments, like, well, sometimes people go out for a cigarette or whatever else, right? Why can't she just lie on the floor somewhere and have 5 minutes in a darkened room, right? And when they start to enable these things and also support with some self-care at home, she wasn't eating. So he organized with a company to have food delivered, so that she didn't have to think about her food. When she got home, it was delivered and the ingredients were there and she could just make it. All of these things meant she started to eat. There were other health-related factors that were having an impact on her. Within about 6 months of that period starting, her seizures stopped completely. Her seizures stopped. So if any of you are thinking, like, what's the point, too much effort, on a human level, you've got somebody who's having seizures in the workplace and prior to joining, and through the changes and considerations, just by being human and helping them in a real empathetic way and not using it against them, which unfortunately sometimes happens, it transformed her life. She was getting into periods of depression because she was going on wondering, why does this dream job not work for me? It doesn't make sense. Because everything I've worked towards is this special interest. Yeah, I don't like it. Or to now I can do the things that I'm really good at, enjoy the environment. And I just, like, on a human level, those changes are going to improve people's lives, and people live in communities, people have families, they have relationships. It will impact on everything. And I think as a caring organization, who you don't just have residents who, by the way, may also be autistic or ADHD, and they may have dementia, and they've got family members who may also be autistic, and you've potential new business may come from those. So when you think about it as an organization, it's not just your people. You have a responsibility that just spreads so far and wide that if you start to do it, which you are, which is why I love the work that you're doing, the impact is far and wide. And so next time I'm stood on the playground, I'm not going to hear a parent talking really dismissively around autism, just being a problem, or I don't want my child playing with a child who's autistic, or something like those that come from employees, people who work in jobs, right? We can change all those minds to make a better world for all of us. So, bit of a rant there, but
No, brilliant there. And you're absolutely right. We all have a part to play as individuals and as organizations, don't we? So last kind of few reflections from you both. If there was one or two things that you would suggest for our listeners, particularly if they're employers or their managers, to do around supporting individuals who are neurodiverse, either they're existing individuals or people coming into the sector, what would that be? So Claire, let's go with you first.
I think my advice would be to listen to the person, not an employee. Because if you're listening to that person's everyday struggles, you're hearing so much more about them. Whereas if you're kind of just itemizing it to what they do as a job, so take the time to speak to them, you know, and just be and also share a little bit about yourself. Not, you know, I think as soon as you open up to people and tell them that you've had struggles, and not everyone has, but just allow yourself to be a bit more open with people, and in turn they may well be open with you, and you may be able to help. And as Theo says, you know, this is about human kindness, and this is about doing things for people across the board. So yeah, listen and learn, and yeah, we can all do a little something. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but we can all do a little something, and yeah, I think it will make a huge difference.
Thanks, Claire. And Theo?
Yeah, it's aligned to that. It's Covey said it really well. It's seek first to understand, then to be understood. And as somebody whose brain works very, very quickly, that's not always easy for me to do, because I almost just want to talk and wait until I find the solution rather than listening, first of all. And I think Claire did it beautifully in the example that she was talking about, where she had an employee where she could have just tried to like jump in and build the solution out straight away. Right, I see a problem, here's the solution. Whereas actually, when you spend more time listening and understanding and not prejudging, because some of the stuff that may be shared with you may be challenging for you to or get your head around, because you're in a different space or place, or you've never been in the space and place they're in, right? So you can make all kinds of judgments about their decisions, what's going on, whether it's right or wrong. All of that's not really going to help you finding the solution. Being able to really sit back and let them share some of those experiences, take them away and further educate yourself outside of that, and then bring some of those learnings back in. That's where I've seen the most successful relationships between, and it doesn't have to be manager-employee, it could be employee-employee, because often we see a lot of struggles there, one employee struggling with the other one because the other one keeps forgetting to do the stuff, and that means they have to pick up the extra workload and all. So you can quite quickly get a group of people who are arguing and not getting along. When if we could just all step back and think about what's really going on there and what things we could put in place to support each other, I think that's a much better place to come from.
Brilliant. And finally, Theo, what can our listeners do to take their learning to the next level? Where can they go to find out more information?
So LinkedIn is for me a very powerful place, and where I share a lot of my content and information. So they can find me on LinkedIn. I have a newsletter that I put out weekly that has hints, tips, advice from that week. That's not too long, so you can follow that if you would like. There's the book if you want to geek out. If you don't want to geek out and you're not of the mind to read a book of this type, it's on Amazon and everywhere else. I've got a podcast where I do similar to what we're doing today, but it's hyper focused on neurodiversity and neuroinclusion. So I talk to all different types of people from different spaces, places on that topic, so you can tune into that. There's also a lot of people sharing neurodiversity content in different areas as well now. So you'll get your finance expert that advises people on finance and business will have their neurodiversity lens, and they want to share that. You'll have your HR experts, you'll have your CEOs, there are lots of people who are experts in a particular area, but they also do it through the lens of neuroinclusion and neurodiversity. So dependent on your area of interest, you can go and find that. Or if you're a parent and you need help, there are a lot of groups in places like Facebook, where they're community groups that focus on localized areas. Like my local area where I live, there's a group that specifically talks about how to advocate for your child, how to get help for your child, how to work with the education system. And I would imagine there are similar groups across the globe that you can join to hear from other people going through the same experience.
Brilliant. Thanks, Theo. So much out there. And, you know, we'd certainly on our journey at Berkley, we've been through and we are continuing to go through our learning journey. And we'd encourage anybody to follow those examples that Theo has given. Theo, Claire, our time is up. Thank you both so much. It's been an absolutely brilliant conversation. And we look forward to seeing everybody on our next podcast. Take care.